So yeah, hi everyone. I'm Foad Albakri. I'm the head of new markets for EO charging. If it's not obvious already, I'm here to talk to you about electric vehicle charging. And really, it's just to tell you a little bit about what we do in the space, what we'll be doing going forward. Me personally be taking this international, so we're a small business that's local, but really taking on the world right now. And hopefully might even inspire you a little bit to get involved with the EV sector. So a little bit about us, I guess, before we get into the nice nitty-gritty stuff. Our story is really, we're only a young company, both in terms of employee age, but also how long we've actually been up and running. So the business was founded by Charlie Jardine, who's a local boy from Stowmarket, and he founded the business in his granddad's pig shed, as the story goes. Just really wanted to take on the existing incumbent kind of EV people in the market. Wanted to do something a bit more young, modern, fresh, and really take on the big boys that are found, backed by Shell and all these big guys, and really bring something new to the table, make something nice and sleek, but really just simple and kind of get back to its roots. At the end of the day, a charger is just a charger. There's no need to make it more complicated than it needs to be. But we've kind of grown very rapidly since then. So I joined probably about 2 years ago now, November 19. I was employee number 31, 32. Now we're up to 150 plus in just over, 18 months or so. And we've probably got about 40, 50 vacancies right now, so you might see us all over the place. And next year we've got another 100 to 200 more people coming in as we take on the world, like I say. So, I guess, move this on. So what you'll see on here is probably a bit of a corny statement. we don't just power electric vehicle, we power people, but to be fair, it's kind of true. I'm evidence of that, so I'm currently head of new markets, but I've had about 4 or 5 different titles since I've joined. And that's because we like to empower people to just bring in their own ideas, change the world ultimately. That's what we're doing in the EV space. But it doesn't just go for us, it goes for our customers as well. So we build new things, we invent things with new concepts, new ideas, and that's all brought about by our own people, so I'm one of those, but also our customers come in, and again, talking back about the incumbent people that are in the market, they will just say, this is how we do things, take it or leave it, whereas most of our customers come to us and say, we know what we're doing, this is how we operate our fleet, our vehicles, we need to know how you can make it work for us. And that's the general vibe that we like to give off to our customers. We want to make it work for them. So what do we actually do? I mean, I've got a bit of a demo there you guys can see, but we cover a few different sectors. So homes, fleets, workplaces, and destinations. I'll mostly be focusing on fleets today, because really that's the interesting stuff. But I'll go through some of these just so you got an idea. So home is obviously home charging. Really enough said about that. You plug your car in overnight once you get home. You get a full charge by the morning, no 5-hour waits at the petrol station, ideally. And I guess our gig on that in the home space is it's the smallest charger on the market, very popular. It's there on the table there. It's about the size of an A5 piece of paper. No need for a massive washing machine on the side of your wall. It needs to be hidden. Really, we don't want to be seen, which is kind of contrary to what most people like to do. We want to be out of the way. The whole point is that it enables you to drive a car. We don't want to be there in your face. You don't want to be advertising it. It needs to be nice and small. Fleets I'll come back to, but workplaces and destinations, really, it's the same as what you've seen outside there. We've actually got our chargers on the walls and on the posts. It's really where you put a charger where you need to be, really. So wherever you're going to go and park for a couple hours, we'll have our chargers up there, really modular. We've got a few with co-op already going on the wall, so if you're going shopping, you plug in for a couple hours and get that top-up that you need, because obviously if you're plugging in at home, you're fully charged anyway. So really going to a workplace, cinema, restaurant is just a top-up rather than enabling you to move. And fleets for us, I'll come to this in a second, it's not just cars and vans. For us, fleets is any business that runs a large amount of vehicles and it's critical to their operation. So a good example might be British Airways. A fleet of aeroplanes is also a fleet, and soon aeroplanes will be electric. DHL have already ordered 10 electric aeroplanes, and we'll soon be looking at that as well. But really, what I want to focus on is buses and trucks. So it's been quite a key area. I've been leading that all year. It's a pretty new sector. There's only probably about 300, 400 electric buses on the market at the minute. In operation, should I say, mostly in London, obviously backed by TfL. And we're really getting involved in that space to try push it along. Obviously, as you've probably seen in the news recently, that's really moving along as well now. It's getting a lot of attention. But from our perspective, fleets, it covers a wide range of things. But as you see on there, depots and en route is what we're calling it now. So most Charging is done at the depot. Your vehicle goes home to where it sits, it plugs overnight, you take your car home and you go home yourself, but the actual vehicle stays overnight in the depot. En route, though, is something completely new. It's a new concept to electric vehicle charging, and that's whereby you start putting chargers where the vehicle is actually working. Rather than waiting for it to get back overnight to charge, you charge while it's actually operational. And we'll get through that as we go through, but just to give you guys an idea as to who we work with. Little old EO from Stillmarket now works with some of the biggest players in the market, and we really enable them to do their work. And when they are all fully electric, they're really dependent on us to make their entire business operation continue to run. And the biggest example of that is big old Amazon, the biggest company in the world, pretty much, I think. And not to sound like Jeremy Clarkson, but they are going about the biggest fleet electrification project in the world. And we're lucky enough to be their global partner for that. So currently, well, you might have seen, Amazon have announced they've just gone out and bought 100,000 electric vans. Probably something that only Amazon can do, to be perfectly honest, but they went out there, bought it, and said, we're doing this, we're hitting it hard. And that's just for Europe. So they've bought 100,000 electric vans just for the European Amazon Prime deliveries. They've not even looked at America yet, they've not even looked at the rest of the world. They came to Europe because we are leading the way. And lucky for us, they chose EO, little local Suffolk-based company, to help them do that. I can't really show you too much about Amazon, so I'll just talk about it because it's all top secret, but they're happy for us to kind of go through it. So what we're doing for Amazon, and it's really a big hot topic for EO, we talk about it all the time because it's a perfect example of what we do, full end-to-end. So we make chargers up in Stillmarket, but that's just a very tiny part of what we do. That's how we started, and then again, going back to what I said earlier, Amazon came to us and said, we want X, Y, Z doing. So what that actually is we've got our own hardware, but we want you to use other people's hardware as well. So in essence, they asked us to work with our competitors, and we no longer have competitors, we just have partners. So we're talking to people that make other hardware. That's ABB, Alphen, you might have heard of various other providers out there. We buy their products and we install them on behalf of Amazon as well. So we've got the hardware, including third party, but we also do software for them. So Jeff Bezos, I know he's retired and trying to go to space right now, but I use him as an example. If he wants to log in and see where all his vehicles are and where all his chargers are, he can do that through the EO cloud. So he logs in from anywhere in the world and he can see every single one of his chargers, see if they're operational, if it's being used, how much energy is being used through it. But also, he can also dial into the van itself. Probably a bit Big Brother who wants to see if the guy's having a McDonald's or not, but you can actually see where the van is in real time, where it is in relation to the charger, and just generally how it's going. And if the charger's broken down, he needs to see that as well. But again, all of this I've just mentioned is still around about 10% of what we're actually done for Amazon, because the big piece is actually the installation. I know it's been mentioned briefly through other people. But to give you a good example, in a few months' time, we'll be digging about 3 miles up the road through the middle of Ipswich just to get power to the Amazon site on Sproughton Road. And that's because they currently have 50 vans operational because it's connected to the actual building itself, and the building is limited on capacity and power. So we are literally connecting into the main primary substation for the entirety of Ipswich to bring the power that they need to power a fleet of 600 vans to that one site. Bearing in mind they have 100,000 vans on the way. They only have about 2,000-3,000 so far. So that's the level of scale that we're talking about. We're literally changing, how everything operates in the entirety of Ipswich. We're going to be causing a bit of a mess, a lot of traffic by digging up 3 miles, but it's what we need to do, and that's just Amazon. We have various other customers, as you've seen, and that's just one site as well. It just shows you how much work there is still left to do. We've only just started on this journey. There's a lot of work still to be done. But that's still not all. So that's not everything. Once we've installed everything, once we've caused that carnage on the roads and installed everything, it's still business critical infrastructure. So the charger works, that's great, but it might not always work. So what we also offer for the likes of Amazon is an O&M service, operation and maintenance. And for Amazon, they want a 90-minute SLA, which means if there's a fault, we get out to site within 90 minutes. An hour and a half, any time of day, any day of the year. Christmas Day, Sundays included. And that's because it's business critical infrastructure. When everything is electric for Amazon, ironically, we have probably more power than they do, Because if I log in and turn everything off, Amazon no longer can operate, because their business is to sell you stuff and deliver it to you. And if that van isn't charged, they're not going to do that. So we find ourselves, again, little old EO in quite a powerful position with Amazon and all these other big companies, because if their vehicles aren't charged, they can't move, they can't operate. Absolutely critical infrastructure. So with that, we need to get out there, fix anything, and to be honest, we have to be there before they do. We know what the problem is before they even know it's occurred. So we have 24-hour surveillance. We can see when the chargers are operational, and if they're not, we'll try to fix it remotely. To be fair, there aren't that many problems, but when there are, they're usually fixed by turning it off and on again. It's one of those things, but yeah, 90% of problems are solved by doing that. If that's not possible, we get outside and just fix it. And we have to get very creative with how we do that. So you think about spare parts, access to them. If we put something in a corner and they lose it, or worse yet, ship it to someone, we've just lost that spare part, so we have to figure out a way of doing it. So we've come up with all sorts of crazy ideas. Again, I can't really show you pictures, but literally having cages in an Amazon facility with a load of spare parts in it. So if anything was to happen, we can get there straight away. Our engineers are all local. So again, Amazon Ipswich is fed by local people, but then we do this across Europe, which I've probably not mentioned yet. So everything I've just mentioned, we're doing on a European scale. We currently have 3,500 chargers across all of Europe, but that's growing literally daily. So we're literally 3% of the way there. We have 100,000 vans, we're at 3,000 or so. We've still got 97% of the job to do. And again, that's Amazon alone. So the reason I was talking about Amazon really is just to show you how big the scale is. I'll briefly touch on Aviva as another case study. I know we've mentioned solar and that sort of thing in previous talks. But to give you another idea as to what we do, this is Aviva in Perth in Scotland. So they wanted to set about and create a fully sustainable building. They wanted to do loads of solar carports. So we did that as well. And again, that's getting in the feedback from the customers and say, great, we've got chargers, but unlike Amazon, we don't just want it from the grid. We want to have it fully renewable, so we want solar power as well. What they don't tell you is solar power is useless, other than during the day, because you have to use it immediately. So if they have people working 24/7, they try to get as many people in these buildings as possible. You can't really plug your car in at night. So then you've got to start looking about batteries and that sort of thing. Get the solar power during the day into a battery, use what you can during the day, and then store the rest for the evening. So we look at all these different types of different concepts, and we're doing something similar for the likes of Amazon as well, because simply there's some areas where there is no power in the grid, or it's going to cost millions of pounds to actually get it in there. So using those case studies, once this actually works, there we go, moving into buses. So everything I've just mentioned is actually quite easy when you compare it to buses. So a typical Amazon van, or a Tesco's van, or an Ocado van, they have around about 80 kilowatts of charge. A bus, the smallest bus you're going to get is about 250 kilowatts, but typically a double-decker is just under 400 kilowatts. So you literally, everything I've just mentioned is easy because it's 4 times as big on a bus. But there's one more thing, and that's that buses work on a lot shorter lead times. So an Amazon van gets back at 6 p.m. and leaves at 6 a.m. That's a 12-hour charge window. That's more than enough time to get it fully charged, even if you have no power. A bus gets back in at 10 p.m., it gets cleaned, and it's back out on the road at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. In some cases, they never stop. They get back to depot, they just swap the drivers, get a quick clean, and they're out on the road again. But if they're fully electric, when are you going to charge? So that's another challenge we had to overcome, dealing with these bus operators and seeing, how can we actually make this work? The other thing with the bus is, obviously, it's quite big. With an Amazon van, worst case, you just take it home and plug it in if the depot is offline. You're not going to do that with the bus, although I would like to see that at some point and see how that actually looks. But yeah, usually bus depots are crammed full of buses. The first one I went to, I was asked how many buses I think I can get in there, and I knew it was a trick question, so I said 50, and he was like, you're about 200 off. So realistically, I thought 50 buses, but they said, no, it's 252. And that's what they get in a tiny bus depot. But then we have to talk about chargers and where do I actually physically put them? Do they pop out of the ground? Do they drop them from the ceiling? Because another thing we found out talking to these guys is, why don't you just lose a bus and I'll put a charger in its place? And he's like, do you want to make 3,000 people unemployed? Because that one bus is literally the margin I have. That's the profit-making vehicle. If I lose one, I'm currently making a loss, and there's no point running the business. So it's a really crazy situation to be in when they're getting pushed to be fully electric, but they have all these challenges that are literally 4 or 5 times as difficult as doing an Amazon depot without the budget. So we have to get quite creative with what we do, and this is an example of what we do. So we've got the smallest charger on the market right there, but we're going to do the biggest as well. So with buses, you need to start being very creative. So one, you try electrify the depot as best you can without removing vehicles and space, but then you have to get creative because there's no other choice. So we started looking at en route charging, or opportunity charging as we call it, which is the pantograph there. That's actually in Birmingham Airport, and it's literally a bus stop. So the bus stops for 5 minutes to pick up people and honestly drop them off and move on again. But in that time, it's gained 20 to 30% of a charge. And that's because there's literally a village or a city's worth of power in that charger. So that charger there for home is 3 kilowatts. What we're looking at here is 300. So just, do the maths in your head on that one. But yeah, what we're doing is currently, this isn't live yet. This is a single decker, as you can tell. In 3 weeks' time, we'll be going live with UK, well, not just the UK, Europe's first double-decker pantograph. So again, little old EO, changing the world. So we've got that for Go Ahead, who's our basically Amazon-level client, kind of going abroad with them. I'll soon be going to Singapore and doing the same thing for them. But yeah, we've got the European, well, the first ever double-decker pantograph in Europe, which is even bigger than the one that you see there in the picture. And again, the idea is the bus drives in, the charger lowers down onto the roof of the bus, which is where the connectors are, and it is literally blasted with a village's worth of power in that time, and it gets 20 to 30% of a charge. And the reason for that is this is actually going in the depot itself, so it's going just on the outskirts as the bus whisks its way out. It stops for 5 minutes while the guy goes in and has a cup of coffee. And when he's out, he's got 20 to 30% more charge. Now, depending on the route, some routes are longer than others. That might be just enough to finish the route and get back home in the evening to charge up. Or it might be a cost-saving, energy-saving exercise. Because if they have 20, 30% more charge at lunch when no one else is using energy, when they get back, they've got 20 to 30% more charge than they would have done. Which means there's more charge or more energy available for the rest of the vehicles in the depot, which means less draw on the grid. And we'll soon start looking at the costs and the cost of energy, because when you start looking at EV, everything's going to flip on its head. Peak time currently is going to be reversed. So peak time will be in the middle of the night. Off-peak is now, because no one's using energy. If you're all plugged in the evening, and so are these guys, then the grid is just going to topple over. So we have to start looking at switching that and literally flipping it on its head, so that they do more charging during the day when it's off-peak, and also the prices are cheaper. And again, when we talk about the margins that these guys make, 1-2%, that might be the difference between a viable product and just completely shutting down the bus service. So in terms of what we do, I've kind of probably covered that already, but consultation, design, delivery, and support. So with these guys, what we do, again, it's quite funny being little old EO and seeing it grow from 30 people that it was when I joined and the hundreds that it is now. We have to do everything, because otherwise it just doesn't work. Other people try get involved and you get consultants and different people involved, but really it only really works if you do the full thing. I've mentioned Amazon Ipswich there. They went ahead and built the depot, and when they came to us, we said, you probably shouldn't have built it there, literally, because they built it in the worst possible place where there is no power. And now it's going to cost you millions of pounds for me to get power to you, because you've already gone ahead and built it. So again, we're in a pretty powerful position to say, actually, this is what you need to do. We know you're big old Amazon, but you need to listen to us, and we'll tell you how best to run your fleet in a way, but also obviously working with them to figure out what's best for them. So we do the full consultation piece, work out what their plans are, where they want to run their routes, if they're a bus or even the van for Amazon, how they best schedule and deliver and use that fleet. Obviously, they're the experts in this. They move parcels, they move people, but we're the experts in energy and how to deploy it. So it's a good marriage. We have to work together quite closely. We obviously then design. So we talked about design there. Digging 3 miles of a road is quite complicated. So you've got to go through all that stuff, but then you give them the electrical drawings and everything they need to do, especially if they're building a brand new site. We're very involved in that stage as well. And we tell them where to build and how to build it. Or if they're too far down the line, as they often are, because they run 1 million miles an hour, we have to try and make it work. And in the case of a bus depot, you have to make it work because it's already there. And it's land they've bought that was a tram shed 100 years ago, and they've just converted it. So we have to work with them as well as best we can to give them the best design, and then, of course, deliver and support, which is, the 90-minute service that we sometimes have to offer. It's going to get a bit more difficult when you've got the first ever double-decker pantograph to maintain. It's a bit more difficult than a van charger, but we'll get there. Briefly go through our products, but I'll leave some time at the end for questions. So that's not really showing up very well on there. But what we've got is obviously that mini charger right there. Our product is the EO Genius, as we call it. That's what we install for Amazon. The idea is that it's a modular charger. So most chargers you see on the market have basically a brain inside every single one, which makes it incredibly expensive. And really, it's the thing that really swung things in our favor when dealing with Amazon, is that actually you have one brain, we put it near to the power supply, it will read what your building is using, and then it will draw what available power there is and give it to the chargers that then share out between them. But it's still one brain, which means the charger itself is very cheap, very replaceable, and to be fair, very reliable. There's nothing that can really fault. It's just a dumb charger that pumps out energy. Hence why we never really have any problems. We've got a 99.8% uptime. But when there is a fault, we'll just swap it because it's cheap and we'll just cover the cost. That's why we've never been fined, even though we're covering a full European scale deployment and we're doing a 90-minute SLA. We only need to allow an hour for an engineer to get out there, and it's a 10-minute job to swap it out. So we've never been fined because that's what we've signed up to. If your charger doesn't work, your van doesn't work, your brand is damaged, so we'll pay for that. But we've never done that. We've never needed to. So that's the EO Genius. It's a very reliable piece of hardware, but that's not always possible. So everything I've mentioned with bus, we don't actually use any of our own products. It's literally the service side of things that we offer. So we use third party. That says OCPP, which just stands for Open Charge Point Protocol. So any charger that is on that protocol, we can work with. It's onboarded onto our software. So I mentioned Mr. Bezos earlier. He can log in and see wherever charger that is on his platform that is compliant. The Chinese aren't so good at that side of things, so we deal mostly with European companies like ABB in the Netherlands, or several Finnish and Norwegian companies who are, the Scandinavian countries are very far ahead in that. And then we've got the rapid charging, or the DC chargers, as you might know them by. And that's the double-decker pantograph we talked about, obviously very big products, but they can come in all shapes and sizes as well. You probably will have seen quite a few on the motorways. They tend to look like big American-style fridges, but that's just the way it is. You have to squeeze a lot of information and a lot of hardware in there to make them work. But nevertheless, we'll supply them, and then we install them and offer the exact same service. Again, I've kind of covered this already, really, but it's what we offer on the software and services side of things is that full, modern, data-driven aspect of things. So one, you can schedule your charging, so that's actually quite a key one, and I mentioned earlier with off-peak and tariffs and that sort of thing. When you plug in a vehicle, the guy who's doing his Amazon deployment, he's out all day, he wants to get home and just plug his van in and go away, but that's not necessarily the best thing for Amazon, because currently, that's peak time, so it's not so viable. But realistically, the van only needs 3-4 hours of charge. So what actually happens is they physically plug in, but it doesn't actually click in to charge. The charge is only activated remotely whenever it needs to be, and that's either preset or done manually, and that would be in line with the tariffs. So what we actually do is do live tracking of tariffs, because those of you who might have Octopus or those sorts of providers, the tariffs will go up and down. So then the charger will click in only whenever it's cheapest, but while still enabling 100% charge by the morning. So that we get quite creative with that, and as you can see there with the cloud and the software, you can track the vehicle as well. So you can log in at any moment in time and see which vehicle you have on the road. And for someone like Amazon that runs a fleet that isn't just vans, it's becoming quite critical. So they have buses as well, they have trucks, they have all sorts of articulated lorries that will soon be electric as well. So again, Mr. Bezos can log in and see, all right, that's a truck, that's going to this depot. That parcel is going to go from a smaller truck to a smaller truck and then to a van. But it's all tracked in one system. And again, that's across Europe. Again, just a bit of a closer upfront image there for the actual cloud, and this is an example of the Isotaro, which is a new Mercedes vehicle that's coming in. So we do a lot of work with the OEMs, the manufacturers of the vehicles as well. And again, little old EO's in quite a powerful position now because they want to work with us. Because ultimately we work with all the operators, they might have different types of vehicles, and if their vehicles aren't on our cloud, then they're probably not going to sell their vehicle. So again, it's sort of flipped on its head, and we're getting inquiries from left, right, and center from all sorts of OEMs saying, can we get onto your cloud? Because otherwise, Go Ahead or Abellio or National Express won't work with us because it needs to be on there. A little piece there just on charging as a service. So we do a lot of finance. So most of these companies obviously don't have the budget, unlike Amazon. So we also help them out with finance now. Again, little old EO now is financing very big projects in the millions of pounds for very big operators. So that can be done in various ways, and the most creative way that we've worked out for people is we've got a big multi-million-pound project, but what you pay is per kilowatt that you use. So we will finance that, sometimes internally, sometimes with partners, but we'll take the big upfront CapEx cost and turn it into OpEx. So literally they pay as they go. They've had all the infrastructure installed. That might have involved, miles and miles worth of digging and civils and that sort of thing. But ultimately they don't care about that. They just pay as they go. Every kilowatt that they use, we'll just charge them on a per kilowatt basis. And that might be for 15 to 20 years. It depends on what kind of deal they want. Another one that's pretty common is you just simply chunk it down. So you spread the cost over 5 years, 10 years, whatever's best. And again, that's just to make them a bit more viable, make the project more viable. If they're being forced by councils or by TfL to go electric, our project is quite expensive, but they also have the buses and the vehicles themselves to buy, which are hundreds of thousands of pounds. So how can we make that transition easier? Well, we'll just chunk it up, make the finance a bit easier to handle. And finally, just a piece on the OEM. I've sort of mentioned this already with Amazon, but yeah, always in safe hands is the motto. So regardless of what hardware it is, it might be our own, and obviously it has its perks. It might be third party, or it might be a completely new one that's never been on the market before, which is stuff we're also doing, that we're literally helping people invent products. We'll maintain it and service it, because that's ultimately the key thing. The hardware sort of becomes redundant. It becomes business critical infrastructure. So it has to be operational, regardless of what it is. So the O&M piece actually becomes more important. Once it's in the ground, it's in the ground, but we need to make sure it works, because otherwise we've just killed your business. If your vehicle isn't charged in the morning, then that's it, game over. So that's sort of the main thing for us. We've got an in-house dedicated team. That's pretty much where all the vacancies are going at the minute, is continuing to grow that, but then also putting it into different languages. So we're working across Europe already with the likes of Amazon. We're going further afield into Singapore and Australia. That doesn't need a new language, but you get my point. So we're bringing in more and more people to service these people, service these different countries in different languages, but still offering the exact same service or level of service to keep things going. And that's kind of it from me, really. I thought I'd just leave it open for any questions for anyone, or otherwise I'll be on the panel a bit later as well. Any questions? Is there a mic? I can hear you from here.
Just two questions. One is, you mentioned about charging as a service.
Okay, wait for the mic.
Thank you so much for the presentation. Two questions. One around charging as a service. Has the uptake, so no need to mention who, but between Amazon, Aviva, the big clients, do they accept a service like this for 15, 20 years? And second one, you mentioned about DNO upgrades in the same slide.
Yeah.
Is DNO really charging for, if you need a charging station sort of a thing, so do they then charge for the upgrade?
Yes. So the answer is yes to both. I'll go into detail. So to be honest, on the finance piece, the idea was theirs, not ours. So our service is, here's a cost. It might be 100,000, million, whatever it might be 10K. And they come to us and say, actually, we can't afford that. We want to do it. We know we have to do it. We don't want to go with anyone else. We want you to do it, but we can't afford it. So what can you do to make it work? And that's where that idea came from. Again, it goes back to the very first slide. We empower people to just come to us with ideas, and that goes for everyone in the room. So they came to us and said, what if we break it out over 14 years? And that was from a bus operator. So the reason for that is in London, in TfL, they work on a 7-year contract. So they bid for a route, literally route W15, whatever it might be called, and they just cycle that for 7 years. So then they came to us and said, can we finance it over 14 years? Which should be pretty obvious, 2 terms. So 1 7-year contract, we'll have the vehicle, but we'll use it on a different route, even if we lose the second tender. But can we finance it over 14 years? And we said, interesting idea, let's have a look at it. And that's what we did. We took the cost. It was a very expensive job because of the DNO upgrade, which I'll talk about in a sec. And we financed that over 14 years. So we had to look at forecast. We went into very creative forecasting. This is the route. This is how big the bus is and the kilowatts per hour in the battery, kilowatts per hour per mile. And then you work that out all across the route. You spread that over 14 years, and then you break it down across the cost of the job, and you charge them either a 14-year fixed fee, which we did in this case, or in other scenarios, we charged them per kilowatt, based on all those calculations that are very complex and over my head. So that's kind of how that worked. To answer your second question on the DNO, yeah, that's the reason for it. So DNOs, to be honest, are very unhelpful. You've got UKPN around here, which actually is probably one of the more helpful ones. MPG, if you get into Scotland, absolutely awful. They will take as long as they need to, or as long as they possibly can to get back to you, and they'll come back to you with a full cost of reinforcing the network. So part of our service in that consultation piece is actually being quite aggressive and challenging the DNOs. So actually, you've seen that it's Amazon, and you're trying to get your network reinforced at their cost, but we're not having that. So we have to get into these conversations and say, actually, it's your network, you need to pay for some of it, and then Amazon or the client will pay for what they need to pay. And that might be a 3-mile long dig just to get the cable from one point to the other. So in that scenario, we're literally going by the Sainsbury's in Ipswich and getting it all the way to Sproughton Road, not far off the A14, connecting into literally Ipswich's main grid substation and bringing the cable there. But UKPN are paying for an upgrade at Felixstowe. And that won't be done until 2023. So that shows you the scale of these jobs. And that's just for 500 vans in one place. So that's where we get into that conversation. The DNOs do have to pay for something, as do National Grid, who is the level above, because they transmit all the energy. But then there's an element that the customer always has to pay for.
Yeah. Thank you for the presentation. We actually already installed some of your charge points.
Good to hear.
I do like the little small ones, so just a little plug there for you. The question I've got is, this is all brilliant for all of the big corporations, but obviously SMEs are 99% of the economy. The government obviously have got these grants out for home place charge schemes, but they've now announced that the workplace charge schemes, but the home place charge schemes are stopping in March. Now, for a lot of SMEs where they don't really want their employees coming to a workplace for charging, that's going to have quite a large impact. I wonder if you've got any opinions on that?
No, well, I guess the honest answer is you've had long enough to get one. The grant's been around for ages. But yeah, it's obviously going out. It used to be 500 quid, and now it's 350. So I guess my advice on that is it's free money, so take it. Get a charger installed as soon as you can. I think our offer is $595 for a fully installed one with the grant included. But yeah, so general statement, get out there and do it. For the guys at home, for the SMEs or people operating smaller fleets, you do get grants as well for workplace charging. I mean, for Amazon, they've not bothered because I think the cap's 40K, and I've already mentioned one job's millions. But for the SMEs, we do a fair bit of that as well. So I can't remember the exact numbers that they get because it's forever changing and soon expiring. But yeah, you'll also get, I think, a cap up to 40K across your estate for workplace charging. And then obviously the individual will get the 350 off their home charger. What we do with that to make it easier for the smaller companies especially, or even the Amazons of the world, is through the software we make it quite creative. So that when, let's say, a Sky van or a BT or a Tesco's van goes home and he wants to charge at home, the charger, that one right there, will recognize whether it's a work vehicle or a personal vehicle. And therefore the energy used, which is the guy's home energy or the person's home energy, the bit that goes into the work vehicle is actually recognized, and then the company pay for it seamlessly for expenses. And then obviously if they're charging their own Renault Zoe or whatever, then that's paid for by themselves as they would for their TV or their kettle. So that's the bit that we try to help out with, but ultimately for the cost of infrastructure is there's been plenty of grants out. It's expiring, so the honest answer is get out there and get it installed before you lose it. Otherwise, you're going to be paying a lot more money yourself. You got another question?
Thank you, Peter. Peter Guddy of the Greater South East Energy Hub, and Shivali took my question around the DNOs. 15 MVA for a charge for 250 buses is a bit scary, so I understand you're going to the grid supply point, skipping out the DNO. My question is more about those who can't afford to put chargers in, and the electrification of transportation, particularly passenger vehicles, and the potential injustice and unfairness that will be created if we do move to a world that doesn't allow charging in rural areas, for example, or those that can't afford to put charging in. How could we locally facilitate that with you where there's a non-market-based solution?
Well, there's various companies in the actual EV space, not necessarily us, although we do enable that. There's various public chargers available, so public networks. Obviously, there's a lot of money to be made here, being quite honest. So you've got a lot of private equity firms and other pension funds and that sort of thing that put the money into other businesses like Instavolt, Osprey, Ecotricity, you might have heard of GridServe. These guys are putting money in so that they will actually take that cost on, and they sometimes pay millions themselves for the DNO upgrade and everything, and then literally install banks and banks of typically rapid chargers. And that's available, so yeah, take your point. If someone lives in a flat, they don't have a driveway, they can't have a charger, they will hopefully have a charging network around them that they can use. Or otherwise, you go back into the workplace scenario, those people will surely be having a job somewhere, or they'll go to the restaurant or the cinema or somewhere like that, and that will have charging facilities open as well. I think, to be fair to you guys need to get involved a bit more. So councils need to do as much as they can, really. There's plenty of funding available from the government, but also working creatively with either businesses like ourselves or these pension funds and other funders available to try put those chargers and those networks in at their cost and then recoup them just as you would a car parking space. So if someone goes to a car park, instead of paying £2 per hour or something like that, they pay per kilowatt that they use for the EV charger. Again, costs will obviously have to be changed. Someone has to get their money back somewhere. But I think that's probably the easiest way. That we do come across quite a few people that want chargers, but they don't have driveways. So either they're not eligible for the grant because the grant says you need to have a driveway, or they just simply can't have it because where are you going to park your car? You can't have a 10-metre long lead across the pavement just to try and get your car plugged in. So the solution there, there's all sorts of things going in right now. You've got chargers popping out the ground in the road. That's a competitor, ultimately, connected curb. Others that go in lampposts. But I think that's, it's a very small market that you probably want to get to the public chargers. So we do a lot of work with the likes of NCP, public car parks, again, and they're changing how they work. There was a question earlier about societal changes and that sort of thing, and that's you change habits and change how people actually work. If you plug in, or if you go and park in an NCP anyway, they are changing how they work to enable you to do that as well. So that you can go, instead of paying, £10 per day or whatever it is, you pay per kilowatt that you use while you're parked there, and they'll recoup the cost of, operating the car park through that means as well. But it is an interesting question. It's a challenging one. It's something that I think everyone needs to have a proper think about, and it should be led by local authorities, I think, to look after that side of the market and that side of the public charging space.